I'll just jump right in to introducing the report,
Yeah.
and we have a quick 20 minutes. This is going to be a quick run through with these two chapters. We have 9 chapters in total, and we're just going to bounce back and forth and show some slides and some details from the chapters, and have a conversation about it. So let me get my stream
Awesome.
set. Okay. So a little bit about the trends report. The whole idea is to give industry leaders in the brokerage industry the strategic tools and insight they need to make big, important decisions in their business. And the idea of the report is we take big topics and trends and look through the lens of about 18 to 24 months of the impact of it, and evaluate all the outcomes and the information needed from that scope. So it's really designed to give leaders the tools to, when they're business planning, to make bigger decisions and to think bigger and broader about what's coming next. And Dean, I know you've used it in your consulting wing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you've seen leaders use it, and you all use it in helping guide some of the clients you work with.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Paul. It's a tool because we look at and we talk about some of the biggest trends affecting the industry, and then you, with others on the team and maybe some outside resources, sometimes the specialists in those areas, do a deep dive and write about it and then provide it in a report. It is a powerful tool. And one of the best practices that we see out there is actually leadership teams to take one chapter a month and dive into it, read it, research it, spend some time diving in and how that affects and implies to their organization, and then come back and work with the leadership group on that one issue and then move into another chapter. So that's what we see. And frankly, every single one of the chapters you could do that on. And as you know, we have 9 chapters, 10 chapters. What do we have this year?
We have 9.
9 chapters. So, I mean, so whether you want to speed up that cadence and not do one a month, whatever that timeline is for you and your leadership team, that is something we would encourage, and it's the best practice.
The content is designed to have that longevity. So to your point, you can take some time with it and use it in meetings and over time throughout the year even. And so it's available now, as I mentioned, t3trends.com/t3trends. We have pre-order pricing that ends the end of day Thursday. So if you're thinking about getting the report, you can get the digital report now, and you'll get your printed report in the mail with that purchase. They come together as a package. And so now's a good time to purchase if you're thinking about getting it. And as mentioned, we're talking about 2 of the chapters today, which is looking at the primary brokerage business models, which we analyzed how brokerages make money. We really distilled down to the 4 business models we think that all of them filter into, and we'll go over that chapter and some of the details there. And then we're covering inside Howard Hanna, which is the largest privately owned brokerage company in the nation. And it's really interesting model. We dive into a little bit of the history and some of its strategy. And you can see these other chapters just show you the breadth and scope of the report. We have a dive on an analysis of NAR. We all know the National Association of Realtors has had a challenging year. We dive into what we think are some of the underlying challenges that the organization faces, and then suggest actually how to improve it. There's been a lot of ideas. We've really talked to a lot of people to try to vet and come up with really strong suggestions and identifications of where this very important organization has some fundamental weaknesses that challenges that it could address. Then with the Buyer Broker Playbook, we're doing a webinar. Me and Jack are doing one next. Jack Miller, President and CEO of T3. We're doing an update on that next week. And then we have a chapter on portals, kind of just a catalog of where the portals are 2 decades after really launching and developing and taking the industry by storm. Then we look at generative AI. We do a kind of cut through the buzzwords. We had a PhD in AI help collaborate on this chapter. It just stills down the essential components of what to expect, what's there, what's coming, and it's a very clear-eyed view of the technology. And then and Dean, you can talk about archetypes probably all day. maybe talk a little bit about that chapter.
Yeah, so trend 7 there, leveraging agent archetypes to win. There are 4 ways agents make money. You distill it down, and the deep dive is you have the networker quadrant, which is the most powerful, and year after year it continues to be the #1 way agents make money. And so you have the networker quadrant, and then we just work around and talk about the other areas and how agents make money, and that's prospector. It's the old form of like picking the phone up and outreaching for sale by owners expires, if you want to kind of think of it that way. Then you have converters. Converters are going to be the people who are buying the leads and converting, looking to convert leads, and get that capture percentage higher than the average, which is less than 1%. And then you have marketers on the other side of it. So there's 4 ways in there. We dive into that. It's actually a wonderful way to not only support agents and hone in your tools and systems and talk about it in that area, but it's a great coaching tool. It's also very good with recruiting, retention. So there's a lot of benefits and strategies that come from that. And one thing I'll throw out, Paul, to this whole point about the trends report and everything, this industry and a lot of things, you can get really overcomplicated. You can make it very sophisticated and it becomes like too much. And one of the things that this report does, and especially like in this, specifically the agent archetypes, we simplify it. We're trying to simplify things and make them easier to understand, distill it down to a point where you can just take that information. It's extremely high, very much a lot of knowledge, and then start pinning those ears back and running and moving in a direction to impact your business.
That's a great point. It's a framework, and the agent archetypes, it just provides a good logical framework where you can take that and actually use some of the elements directly, like how to audit your business, which agents best fit your model, right, which mechanism should you be focusing on, which type of market. There's a lot there. And then we have home inventory, which is kind of a persistent challenge for the industry. And we just do Dr. Paul Bishop on our team, an economist, research and wrote this. This just really shows, kind of pulls the thread on what's been happening and what's likely to happen, and what are the key factors involved in what's potentially coming. Then we have this collection. We get a lot of data and research at T3, and we have a collection of just really interesting brokerage stats related to the brokerage industry, including like a breakdown of MLSs and types and brokerage market share using our Mega 1000 data. So Dean, we'll jump right into the chapters that we're going to cover today. So we're covering, the first one is the brokerage business models. As I mentioned, we identified, the team and Jack and I and Dean Sum, we're like, what are the essential elements by which you can define brokerages if you look at the full landscape of brokerages? Because the whole value in doing that exercise is being able to compare brokerages with each other, because brokerages can, it's hard to understand how to benchmark and how to do a competitive analysis. So that was part of the effort behind it. And Dean, so we have 4. We started on 4. Why don't you kind of run through and introduce each of them?
Yeah, so you think about the top right there, traditional. So that's more of kind of the brokerages that have been around for a long time. And again, like Paul said, the separation of these and how they created the categories tie more into the primary, how they primarily make money. All right, how does that structure look? So
through brokerage services, we narrowed it just to the not ancillary. So we're like in brokerage operations. So that's a good clarification there.
So the traditional is going to be that commission schedule that typically, the more money that is generated from an agent, the higher commission split they receive. It moves up the more successful they have. You can see the chart there. When you talk about higher and higher agent risk, and then we talk about the benefits, the brokerage risk on the high side, meaning they're spending a lot of energy and money and time, training, technology, support, all those in the traditional area. So the idea is that we're here and we're providing a lot of tools, a lot of systems. And then in that, you typically have a commission structure that is going to be a little more favorable to the brokerage. But again, as an agent becomes more successful, then they end up going higher and they stay. And one thing I want to throw out to make sure to everyone, because one of the great benefits at T3 and we have within our brokerage and team consulting division is we look under the hood of a lot of different brokerages across North America. So that includes not only the US, but Canada and Mexico, the Bahamas, So we see a lot of things. And one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is every single one of these models we see under the hood, the financials, and every single one of these models can be very successful. And they are successful in markets around those areas I just stipulated. So with that said, and there's a couple pieces to that, but I'm going to go to Paul's point here about highlighting these four, but I want to make sure that's underlying that every single one of these models, there are successful organizations out there doing it in these certain buckets that we put them in. And for benchmarking purposes, things like that, it allows us to really kind of hone in and say, okay, somebody in a traditional model and comparing them to a fee-based model as a benchmark, for example, that becomes difficult in some categories. So we want to try to make it simplistic. Business generation, as I go counterclockwise, that's going to be the business. That's more of the team-rich mindset. It's the team. I'm going to just kind of say, it's the brokerage. Maybe it was a team that did so well, decide they want to go out on their own, but they generate leads. It's typically where they're going to generate a lot of leads from lead sources. And in that business generation, they're then providing that leads to their agents, whether it's a team-rich, and we kind of blend the team brokerage terminology I do in this business generation area.
And I think it's important to note we use the term business generation, and we want to, the effort here is to clarify and the term that encompasses the different models within that, because to your point, the team-rich, quote unquote, falls within that, but also different models that the point is that these companies generate the bulk of their business for the agents that the business the agents do. For example, Jason and Mrs. Group, which we'll get to later, they have a different take on that. It's different than what you would think of as a team-rich, and of course, Redfin falls in there. And then fee-based, I'll jump in just to, we're going to be able to talk about these in detail in the next few slides, Adine. The fee-based are just a kind of a mix of sometimes monthly fees or desk fees and transaction fees that these companies are charging. And so these are the predominant ways. So we categorize companies by if they get the majority of their revenue by this way, because a lot of brokers, and Dean, you mentioned your team goes under the hood with a lot of companies. A lot of companies actually apply a mix of these. So this is not
exactly
pure.
Right.
We know this is not pure, but this allows, there is a predominant thrust with a lot of these companies, and the companies are innovating, which is the whole point of a chapter like this. So you can get some insight of actually how these operate, and then maybe think about some threads to experiment with. So first up, traditional brokerages. These are the largest companies in the nation, like the number 1, number 2, number 3 by the Mega 1000 traditional brokerages. Traditional graduated commission cap. We did an analysis and we categorized all the brokerages in the top 100 of the Mega 1000, the ranking of the 1,000 largest brokerages in the U.S. by sales volume, which we do every year at T3. There's 55 firms this year were categorized as traditional. And so this is, I think most of our audience probably knows this one. So we'll jump, in the interest of time, we'll jump to the cap brokerages. And these, Dean, have 2 of the fastest growing brokerages in the U.S. In EXP and Real. I know you and Lisa on your team have been evaluating these newer models. Maybe talk a little bit about the features.
We're always doing deep dives and also working with organizations who do competitive assessments in their markets. So we're constantly looking at different organizations and their structures. And these companies have really honed in very clearly. They actually do a really good job at giving the wealth, the idea of creating wealth and wealth strategies through, and I know we'll get to it in just a little bit about revenue share and other things along those lines. So they've done a really good job of putting that in place and supporting a lot of agents moving over to these organizations. So they've had some tremendous growth over the last number of years, for sure.
And you mentioned the revenue sharing. That's not an essential component of brokerages in this category, but each of these brokerages here have that component, because KW, it's a profit sharing, so it's a subset of revenue sharing, of course. And then Real Brokerage and EXP, they're doing the tiered revenue sharing as well, just off top line revenue. And you can see the caps differ here, like 16 for EXP for agents. Once they hit that in an annual cycle, they don't pay any more commissions to the brokerage. They do pay a transaction fee, to our point, to some degree. To our point of the mix of the models here, and then Real Brokerage is 12, and then KW varies by market. And these represented 22 firms among the top 100 in the Mega 1000. Then fee-based brokerages, and we identified some of the largest and most notable. These are roughly top 20 brokerages here. We have United Real Estate, Remax Gold, and Fathom Realty. And you can see there's a mix of membership and transaction fees. So these usually are not taking a split of a commission or a very high to the agent, like in Remax's case. And you can see in United Real Estate, for example, it was a membership fee per month, $65, transaction fee, $5.95 per transaction. And then they have an errors of admission schedule as well. And the Remax Gold should be noted. We interviewed them as part of this. And like a lot of companies, they're experimenting with a lot of different models. So this might be still the predominant model they operate today, but they have a capped option for agents. They have a fee-based option for agents. They have a traditional option for agents. So companies are really trying different things now. I know you've probably seen that in your work.
Yeah, I've seen it for so many years. I mean, even back anywhere before it was anywhere, it was Realogy, and they would look in different markets and try different commission structures and different, maybe through an acquisition, left it over there and let it run at that model and see how that worked. And others are doing this. And then to your earlier comments, a lot of blends. Like some markets, for example, you might have some of these might have, as they're independently owned. Some of these, if they're not part of if they're independently owned and operated as a franchise. Sometimes they'll have flexibility. They'll have the company's structure, but they might also, because the market might sustain it, they'll actually have a separate option. Len, you had mentioned that earlier. So we got too.
Yep. And moving to business generation, this one is these are the only 3 companies among the top 100 actually. And so we have Redfin, which we're all pretty familiar with. Redfin. It's a tech forward, led with its portal. As a brokerage and direct brokerage operations, I think it's in about 30 states, but it's referring in all 50 states, and generates business in all 50 states. Mark Spain, which is that teamers model you talked about, Dean, in the Southeast, is really growing, and I think it's expanded to Texas. And Jason Mitchell Real Estate, which is really interesting. It's one of the biggest growths year over year in this Mega 1000. It has an interesting model where it partners with different referral partners like mortgage companies and others and moving companies, and it pays a referral fee to that company and then handles it in-house and takes 60% of the fee and gives 40% to the agent, and it's generating 90% of the business that its agents generate. In that way, it has a really interesting, innovative model, and we have a digest of that chapter.
Well, this is something too, that this section right here, this business generation, is one of the things that all the other models, and specifically the traditional more so than the other ones, actually, this is where you can compartmentalize, meaning you could have a division within the traditional real estate company that is the business generation model, as an example. And that's where someone has an E-team or whatever you want to call it. But there's a team that's in there that runs like a business generation brokerage underneath the hood of the traditional. And one of the things also, this model here, if I can just finish up real quick, Paul, this model right here is one of the highest return on revenue models that we see. There's a very high, to your point there, keeping 40, paying the agent 40, keeping 60, and doing things like that. There's a real high company dollar number and a really high
if you control the business, you can help. It helps agent training and alignment with the processes. And you can see in Mark Spain, the company generated leads on listing, and we didn't segment in the report, we have it identified properly, but it's the listing, company generated listings, the broker keeps 80%. And it's just because they're generating all the agents are very focused on just selling and supporting the client. So that's to your point.
One thing too on that, Paul, is into the audience to know about is that some people might think, well, that's gonna be hard to recruit agents to that. And that's completely opposite. They actually have people lined up to work at those organizations, and they have to go through a process of weeding them out and deciding who they're going to bring on. So I just want to throw that out and share that.
Definitely. So we have much more in this chapter. I encourage you to look at. We do an analysis of how the composition of business models have changed in the top 100 companies from 2018 to 2023. And it's a great, you can see how the industry is changing. Why? So we'll jump into Howard Hanna. This is, as I mentioned in the intro, this is the largest privately owned company in the U.S., brokerage company in the U.S., and it's still family run. And Dean, like, here's some of the details. It's the seventh largest brokerage. It's the 11th largest enterprise, which included the franchise operations. And why don't you just run through some of the details here?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things originally founded in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's where I'm born and raised. So I love this story, and the chapter really goes in depth. But they've actually done a tremendous amount of acquisitions over the
Yes.
last couple decades, and really have grown to, as you just stated, the U.S. seventh largest brokerage, largest independent, and done a phenomenal job. And one of the things I loved about the chapter is how it really got into the culture, and how the culture is so important. And having 8 of the third generation involved in the organization, things along those lines, I just thought it was powerful. Here you go, right here. So this incredible.
This stood out because it was founded. The current CEO is Hobie Hanna, which is the grandson of the co-founders Howard Hanna the second, and Anne Freivogel Hanna. You can see we have a little family tree here. All 3 of their children played key roles in the business. And then 8 of their 9 grandchildren, you can see at this level here, are in the business and play significant roles. And I should stress, because, as part of putting this chapter together, I was able to interview a lot of the executive team at Howard Hanna and had a lot of conversations. The company, it has a strong family leadership element, but also it's folded in these other leaders that have been there for a long time. And it's been doing, you mentioned these acquisitions. It's been doing these acquisitions. And recently, in the last few years, it's been sharing equity. It hasn't taken 100%. It shares with the leadership to empower them. And like Rand Realty, Howard Hanna Rand Realty is an example. That company is now, the leaders have some equity in that, and they have some relative autonomy to make decisions. They acquire companies under them. Same thing with Allen Tate. It's the same. So they're empowering and investing in leadership beyond just the family, which I think is a compelling angle there. It's one of the few brokerages were family owned and run for a long time. This is the one that's kind of standing still at the top. There's a few others, but it's growing and innovating.
Well, it's one of the things too, I think organizations, whether they're Howard Hanna or others in the space, having, and that we see this actually in smaller operations as well, but giving equity really ties and helps bring in good quality people, that grow, or good leaders that stay with the organization because they've got skin in the game, they've got ownership, and they're not just an employee. And so that's an interesting, really a side of the business here that is coming on more.
We're seeing that as a trend in some of the acquisitions that have happened recently. Peerage, which we know well, has shot to the top of the brokerage chart with that partnership model, which we think is very, very compelling for a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, having skin in the game drives a lot of performers. So as an overview of their strategy, like as Hobie says, the company, because it's privately owned and it's family run, they're able to be very disciplined. And they can stay on the same page. And it's interesting, when interviewing some of the family members, I was like, we all know how hard family can be, right? And how do you make this effective? And so they have they have all the normal things, but they're all on the same page, especially with the discipline they have and the strategy they're going after. And that was one thing that stood out. They also have the strong ancillary focus, and they own mortgage and title and insurance in all the markets they operate in. They are embedded in their offices. And then one of the integrations, in interviewing their tech team and getting a demo of their technology, their technology is, they have all their technology integrated. They can see which cohort of agents is using which technology at what cadence, and they can break it down by office, by geography, by production type. It allows them for coaching, but also negotiating with tech vendors. and they say they're applying the same methodology to how they process leads. So I think it's Dean, I know you see a lot of companies that definitely stood out. I think that's a dream of a lot of brokerages.
Yeah, they're really, that's one of the things the chapter brought out, which was of great, it was interest, is, they've stayed on the cutting edge of technology. And they're right there when utilizing and being able to help and coach their agents to higher levels of success and support and things along those lines. And that ties into, frankly, what I saw also in the chapter and what I know in just real life and in seeing in Hobie and Helen and different events and Hadi. They're connected. They're great leaders from afar when you see them, just great leaders and what they've been able to accomplish. And one of the things so the technology piece and the training and the support, and one of the things I also took from the chapter that I thought was excellent, and it just shows, because you alluded to that the original Howard Hanna, how he would ask the kids and the grandkids, who do you work for? And it's the agents was the answer. He goes, the agents, we work for the agents. And then now you have Hadi writing, birthday cards, 15 to 20 a day. You alluded that in the article. And then you got Hobie now. He writes handwritten cards to people on their first listing, their 10th listing, things like that. That is something that is, no matter how big the scale in the business, they haven't left the roots of what's made them such a great
that really
company.
stood out to me. I mean, that is like the imprint of a family business, that it's like that there's the heart and there's the connectivity and the culture that maybe can only exist to that degree in a family owned and run business, which is like kind of a remarkable achievement by them. So they're definitely an interesting company, much more to digest in the chapter. So we're at battle time. We're a few minutes over. Just to recap, the trends report is available now. You can purchase it at t3trends.com/trends, and the report is shipping now, and it's a really valuable resource designed for leaders to help make the biggest decisions in their business. And we have a series of webinars to help kind of give some leaders some insight into how to use the report and better make some strategic decisions. And Dean, I know you're going to be on a few of those. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
And thank you, everybody.
Chris just put something in the chat too, Paul, that the pre-order pricing is ending this Friday. So if you're interested, you better move. I would encourage you to move on it.
Now's the time. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody.